groups, guys, is called Demo All.
Hold out one sec, Deb. I got to do the
Okay.
housekeeping.
Okay.
Welcome to our Google Hangout. This is with Deb Bialeschki, Director of Research at the American Camp Association. Um, Before that, I just want to go around and introduce ourselves for the audience at home. Tommy, will you say your name and what your camp is and how many Google Hangouts you've been to?
My name is Tommy Feldman from Camp Granite Lake in Golden, Colorado, and I've
Yay.
been to a few. Two.
Ryan.
Hi, I'm Ryan Rosen from Camp Canaret in Los Angeles, outskirts of Los Angeles, out here in California. And I've been to many of these. I don't even know the number now.
My name is Matt Smith, and I have Longacre Camp in Pennsylvania, and I too have been to a bunch of these. And yeah, Deb,
Yeah.
why don't you take it away? Introduce yourself and introduce what you're doing, and then I'll start sharing some of your stuff.
Sure. So Deb Bialeschki with ACA, Director of Research and also Chair of Professional Development. So Matt, thanks for asking me to come and kind of share a few little tidbits with you guys about what to do when you get data and how to start making some sense out of it, and then more importantly, how best to be able to use it. So I've shared the handouts with you guys, and basically these handouts come directly from the reports that are being generated by the new, we just call it the YOB 2.0. So it's the online version of ACA's Youth Outcomes battery, and it's the basic version. You go, well, what's basic? Well, basic helps you answer the question, did the kids increase on a particular outcome? So you probably know we have these 11 outcomes that we've created some measures for, and we started with those 11 primarily because the camp said these are outcomes that we care about and we'd like to see you develop these first. And two, there weren't existing measures that were very easy to use or very good for a camp kind of setting. And so there's other measures out there. You know, we can have a whole session on measures, but this one, I just want to look at output. And so if you have the handout, it's the demo all PDF.
Just give me one second. I'll pull it up here.
Okay. So to give you the background on this, imagine that you are a camp who is intentionally targeting independence, exploration, and problem solving. And you have a couple of different kinds of groups of kids that your staff are really intentional about these three outcomes with, or at least you think they're intentional about it. Oh, actually there's four, because the affinity for nature is the fourth one. So independence, exploration, problem solving, and affinity for nature.
And which one am I pulling up, Deb?
It's called general or demo all.
All right.
So you've trained your staff kind of around what can we do to help kids have more opportunities to practice independence or problem solving or exploration or getting connected to nature. And so you've gone along and that's been your goal. So let's pretend like this is a 2-week session that you've had the kids. Doesn't matter if it's day camp or overnight camp at this point. That's just your reality. I'll tell you that in this set of data, it was for an overnight camp experience. So you need to know whether you're really hitting your mark or not. You know, you need to know, are the kids leaving feeling like they've increased in these areas? Now, that's important to remember. It's the kids.
One?
It's the kids' perception. Let me see. I don't have that up right now.
If you just click on my.
No, that's the chart. It's just called I think it's just called Demo All PDF.
It was one of the 6 documents. Yeah,
There
there
you
you go.
go. There you go. Good one. Good one. So if you use the ACA online thing, imagine that, you know, at the end of the session, the day before the kids were going to be taken off, you had your iPad out or you had a tablet, and you had picked these 4 measures, and the kids went on their little iPads, click, 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 hit submit, turn it into their counselor. So you did that for these kids in this one. In this one, I just have 20 of them that's in here. So
And
so
I'm
base
sorry, Deb, you're saying this is independence, interest
uh-huh.
in exploration.
And affinity for nature,
Yep.
short form, and problem solving confidence.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. I didn't tell what those abbreviations were. So when they dump their data off, there is a drop down for reports. And if you just choose general results, this is what your report will look like. A real basic table that's just giving you the averages. And so you'd look at that and go, okay, now this is on a 5-point scale. That's kind of cool. What does it really mean?
What does
You
it mean,
know?
right?
Yeah, I mean, okay, great. So on a 5-point scale, is this important or not? So to try and help figure out, you know, what else we could look at, we could say, well, we know that there were some different things that were going on during that session that we're kind of interested in. We kind of are interested in the unit the kids were in. You know, we're kind of interested in gender. You know, did the girls and boys experience the same kind of thing? And so we have the ability to kind of parse out our data. So at this point, there should be 2 questions in there. What do the general results mean? And what else are we interested in trying to understand it? Because those right there, it's interesting, but it doesn't tell us a whole lot. And so what we could do is, Matt, you're going to need to open up another one. It's the PNG, and it says res norms. So what I would do on these general ones, when I would run the first set, I would pull up the norming tables, because the norms are calculations across the board in all kinds of camps, just in general. So these aren't necessarily camps that are even targeting things like independence. It's just, you know, a couple thousand kids that went through and just said, in general, in an overnight camp, here's how kids would perform on any of these outcomes.
It's like a baseline kind of thing.
It is, and it's great. Thanks, Tommy. And that's exactly how it's used. It's used as like a benchmark. And so what you can do now is you can go to that benchmark and start saying, oh, okay, cool. What does this look like? So on this one, when you look at, you know, the norm, what we would want to do is we would go back and find, you know, find our average on one of these outcomes. So let's pretend like we're interested in independence. And we know that the average on independence at our group of kids was 3.65. Well, like we said, we don't really know what the heck that means. But now, if we look on this norming table and we look under independence, there's a couple of cool things that we can do. We can find that the average, the mean on independence, is 3.64. Cool. I mean, we're right on track with the average, but maybe not so cool, because this average is calculated on just several thousand kids, you know, that may not have any intentionality at all behind independence. And here we were intentionally trying to target that. And so we don't get too happy seeing that our means match up. What's more telling is to go up that column now in the percentiles. So you see where it says 40, and if you read across on independence, it says 3.5. And then at 50, it says 3.8. So now this is pretty meaningful, because our 3.6 is falling in between the 40th and 50th percentile. And what that's telling us is that we're kind of in the middle of the pack. So this actually matches up pretty well with the mean, because our mean was pretty much on target, and now we see that when we look at the percentiles, we're falling in that 40 to 50 percentile. Maybe we're okay with that. Maybe, you know, this is a really new group of kids. Maybe we know that these kids were coming in with a lot of challenges around independence, but maybe not. And so that's the cool thing. It's like, okay, what does this mean? How do we start making sense out of this generic thing? And then, so this sets us up. We've got the question now. This is setting us up so great, because now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to those things that we're kind of curious about. We're kind of wondering, what does this mean if we start kind of looking into understanding our group better? So Matt, if you want to take this and open this up, it's called Demo by Unit Stats. So if you open that one up.
This one?
I'm not seeing your screen.
No, it's
It's just called Demo by Unit Stats, and it's a PDF.
Matt, the names are in the top left corner of your window.
I don't. Oh, okay, good. Thanks. Demo, but thank you. Thank you, Ryan. You see that?
Okay, so yes.
Perfect.
Perfect. All right, so now this is so cool, because what we know in our group, we gave this survey to some backpacking kids, to some CITs, that, you know, kind of a leadership kind of group of kids, and a STEM group of kids. And you're looking at this going, wow, those averages are way different than when we first took a look at our data. And so now, by being curious about these different groups and how they're performing, it raises a whole bunch of other questions. Because when we look at this, we could say, all right, we targeted 4 things here, you know, and we thought that it made sense for these 3 different kinds of units of activity that were going on. And maybe they do, and maybe they don't. And so this is our opportunity to start checking this out and saying, wow, how come when we look at, let's say we look at the independence averages first. Our backpacking kids, 3.6. Now remember, that was pretty close to the average. Look at our CITs, 4.2. They're considerably higher. What happened to the little STEM kids? 2.8. And so on independence now, just on that one thing, we have some interesting questions to start asking ourselves and trying to make sense out of our data. Because when we start looking at this, we're kind of, well, what's going on? So if you guys saw that, I mean, what would you start thinking? Where would your head go if you saw that kind of a split out on an outcome like independence? What would you do?
Well, my first question would be: is where did they start, and have they moved from, you know, have the STEM kids moved from 1.9 to 2.9, because that you know, meaning where they come in from?
Well, you know, Tommy, I would agree with that on one hand, but not on another, because this measure doesn't really care where they start. This is asking the kid, do you think you increased on independence? And there's 6 questions, you know, that's asked. So the way you're approaching it is actually it's a nice scientific way of doing it, where you have a pre and a post design. But we know in the camp world, people hate that. You know, they don't want to give those things out. So at the end of the day, most directors will say, hey, I don't really care where they started. I just want to know, did they feel like they increase?
Okay.
You know?
It's just how the question's written, and I understand.
Yeah. So, but it's good. I mean, I would ask that too. If I was coming at this in a little different orientation, I would want to know maybe where they started and where they went. But this is just purely, do these kids increase or not?
My mind goes to trying to a story. Like I think that probably stereotypes or something, or prototypical kids in these demos. My mind starts to explain the numbers in some way. it may not be right, but then I'm like, oh, of course the CITs, they're striving, and the STEM kids are stuck in a lab or something. I mean, my mind creates stories around the numbers.
Exactly. And that is a very good thing. That is exactly what we like. We like to see that, because now we start having avenues to follow up on this. And we could say, I wonder what else is going on there. Okay, the CITs, those kids might be a little bit older than what some of these other younger kids were that's in the STEM program, for example. And so it makes us start asking them questions. Or we could say, wow, were the staff working with these kids in the same way? And so it starts opening up some additional questions that you would be able to then kind of to look into a little bit more on your own. And for me, when I looked at these, I looked across now and I said, okay, so we know that these STEM kids were kind of low. Well, if you look, they're kind of low across the board. And so you might be looking at these going, what was that STEM program doing? How was it operating? Was it operating somehow differently than everything else that we were doing? Even to the point of, look at that affinity for nature. Why were those kids so low on that? What was going on there? Well, here's the scenario. They were doing a robotics thing at camp, and the kids were inside a lot. They had a great time, but it also was really structured. There wasn't a lot of independence going on there. They had a fair amount of structure. Yeah, the exploration opportunities may have been there, but there's another side piece that we can look at on that one. And then you would say, well, problem solving, you would think there would be a little bit higher score there in problem solving. So were they ever given opportunities to sort of independently explore these things and come up with problems to solve? Or was it being so structured because the goal was to create their robot and to, be able to play around and do cool stuff with the robot, and we kind of lost sight of how we were getting there, to the point where the kids really weren't getting some of those outcomes that we thought. So one, maybe we had the wrong outcomes, or two, maybe our staff weren't really, following through on some of these things that we talked about in staff training, and creating the robot was way more important than having the kids problem solve and maybe not, getting something done that day. So it gives some opportunities for you now to really kind of explore and interpret, what was really going on there. And then you can say the same thing with the backpacking. If you look on that, backpacking had the highest for affinity for nature. Well, yeah, these kids were in a 2-week program and they were out for almost a week on a trip. I mean, they were outside the whole darn time. So of course the opportunities to maximize that experience was great. And so these kids now had this wonderful experience that's showing up that, yeah, when they came back, when they're leaving camp, they have a heart connection with outdoors that was different. In their mind, they grew because of what they had just experienced during that 2-week time. And I would contend it's the same kind of thing with the CITs in independence and problem solving. Those kids are a little older. You're setting some experiences up for them. You're trying to help them learn to become more independent. You're trying to help them understand about problem solving. So it makes a lot of intuitive sense that you're seeing some of those things now showing up in the scores. And Matt, if you open up the other one, it's called Demo Gender, because this just goes and speaks again to another way of being able to look at these data to make sense in terms of some like social issues that might be out there. And as you're getting that open, I'm going to go ahead and start because I don't want to take too much time here. I want us to be able to.
Sorry about that.
Deb, I think as I'm watching this and listening to what you're sharing, I think you're right. I think it brings up a lot of other questions. Last group that we were looking at, I feel like there's so much more back data that we would need to understand the data that we're
Yes.
looking at,
Yes.
because you know, from gender to age to you know, how they feel. If they feel more independent, absolutely. I think your point is a valid one. Like that, we're just asking how they feel, not did they see growth during the summer, but do they feel like they saw growth.
Yes.
So I see the difference in those two questions, but I think your variables you talked about with the staff, did they not achieve that, or did they not? Did one staff member do a better job than another? Were there inherent differences? Did they do the same activities, but the CITs felt different than the you know that the STEM group? We don't know, you know. So I think there's a lot of variables here that can impact the value of these numbers.
Absolutely. And that was such a perfect plan, because
Yeah.
here's the thing. People put so much stock in numbers. I mean, I love them. I love numbers. I think they're great, but I think they are great at raising more issues than what they actually solve. Do I want to be very confident in saying, yeah, you know, what we did here made a difference? Look, these kids feel like, and I think it's important to be able to talk about how kids think about the experience. I really do. And I know there's some need for some, quote, objective observation, maybe by a staff member who can come in and make some kind of judgment about what they actually are seeing in the kids. So I think there's value behind that. And, we have an outcomes, set of tools to help with that as well. But, if you're looking at these things, absolutely, you're right, Ryan, there's so many things. So like looking at this gender one, again, if I was looking at these numbers, I wouldn't be happy with just looking at the unit. I wouldn't be happy with just the general stuff. I would look at as many variables as I could access. So this one is one that looks at it by gender. We have it by age. We had it by enjoyment. I mean, there's a whole slew of reports that you would be able to access now, again, to start creating that story, as you were calling it, Matt, but more importantly, just to have additional points of reference. So if you were talking about the girls, for example, you now know kind of what's going on with your girl, gender nonconforming boy perceptions. And we know that, a lot of times there's some social issues that get mixed up in some of these different variables, like independence, like exploration. There's some gendered looks at that. So I don't think it's necessary to go into a ton of detail on this, other than to say you need to pay attention to a lot of those different variables, because not one just one variable is not going to help you tell your story. And that's why stats can be really confounding, I think, in the world of practice, because a lot of times people aren't real comfortable kind of working around with all of these different lenses that you can use. And so it's rather than being an empowerment tool, it's looked at as sort of a scary thing. And that's my mission, is to help people look at these as tools. They're not the end all be all, but they're tools. So just like on this gender, when we look at this, we see now some breakdowns, around gender. And Matt, if you would go and open up that other PNG that's there, it's the chart one. Yeah. The girl norms. Okay. Yes, girl norms. So when you look at the girl norms, you can do the exact same thing here now, or the boy norms. We don't have gender nonconforming, because when we started creating these norms, we didn't gather data that way. This gender nonconforming is just a new thing that we've built into the online version of this, because we had camps who were asking for that. They really felt like they were serving a variety of kids who didn't necessarily, believe that they were one or the other. They saw themselves as in some kind of continuum. So we don't have norms for that. But on this one, if we look at where the girls are, we can see some of the exact same information, but now it's just focusing on girls. So we can take the averages that we see here for the girls, and we can see how they look in independence, exploration, affinity for nature, and problem solving. So, I think for me, taking this information and trying to create a story and have as many different angles of looking at this as I possibly can, that to me, that's what starts making sense out of some of these reports that we have. And I think on the online version with all of these different reports that you have the possibility of now asking for, you don't really have to know how to create them. You just have to know to pull down and choose them, and then how to start looking at them. That hopefully these norms will give useful benchmarks. The different reports will give you varied ways of being able to look at that generic, oh, hey, we had a 3.65, and now be able to tease that apart and try to make some sense out of that in a way that's helpful, to you as the director, and creating some messages for your parents or for your donors or for marketing or whatever. You have some data now that should help you with that, but it's also a really cool data to give back to the staff and be able to have their ideas on, hey, these were kids that you worked with in your backpacking unit. I thought this would be really cool for you to see, how they thought things looked. And what do you think about it? Looking back on it, what were the things that you think contributed? Were there things that happened that didn't? And it's a really great way of starting to look at program now and being able to improve, some of the things that might be going on there. But I keep coming back and stressing, these are merely tools. They are not the end all be all. They're useful tools. So there's one other thing there, Matt. I put in a couple of the charts just so that you guys could kind of see what the charts look like. And so it doesn't matter which one. There's one there on gender charts. When you do these reports in this online version that we have now, it gives you those tables like what we were looking at, but it also creates these little sort of pictures of your data. So, when you start looking at, well, what does this really mean? Again, this was broken out by gender. Imagine what it would look like if you were looking at the unit one, or if you were looking at it by age. You would see the sort of visual representation of the data that a lot of people can kind of get a feel for easier than just looking at the numeric tables, but they're meant to go kind of hand in hand. So the charts help you visualize what your number data on the tables look like. So that's kind of my deal for today. I don't know if you guys have questions or any other comments. And Ryan, I appreciate your view on there, because it's data analysis. It's not necessarily a straightforward, here's the answer. There's usually multiple answers that are out there, and a whole heck of a lot more questions.
Well, we've seen over the years with what we've been measuring on our end is that, each year the variables, you have the counselor that changes, you have the kids that change, you have,
Yep.
So if you do nothing different in the program and just change one of those two, if you don't change anything else, you're going to get different results just because of those
Yep.
interactions.
Yep.
And that's what makes this so difficult. So then if you make a change thinking that's going to help achieve something, you don't know why it either did or didn't work. So it's like a moving target you're constantly trying to hit. I see Matt laughing.
Yeah. And that is so true. And for some people, in some of the camps, they have a luxury of having returning staff that, you don't always have 100% by any means, but sometimes you've got some key staff that come back. And so if you do decide to change something up in your program, you've got enough continuity from the year before that, if it's truly a program change and it's just something, it's not necessarily, staff have to do this differently, then sometimes that can be a help. Sometimes it can be a huge hindrance, if you're trying to do something, a behavior, and change something that is kind of staff driven, and you've got returning staff who are used to doing it, one way, and now you're asking them to kind of think about it a little bit differently. I can give you a great example of that with when we were doing the program quality piece to this, the staff felt like it took too long to let the kids decide and to solve problems. And they were on a structure, they had to have the kids down at swimming at a certain time. And so it was difficult to make some of the changes happen without a real big structural change. And so it's hard to know, well, is it the structure change that makes a difference? Is it the fact that the staff now are letting the kids have enough time, to solve their problems, to make some choices? Yeah, that takes a whole heck of a lot longer. Makes the day look kind of weird in some cases. But what's the most important thing we're trying to achieve there? So yeah, you're totally on target. But I come back and I would say, I like having some data. It's not perfect data. There's never going to be the perfect set of data. But if I can at least have something to share with my parents or my donors, something that's going to help me back up some of my marketing messages, I think that's a pretty okay starting place. I really do. I don't know, Matt, you and Tommy, what have you guys, how are you with all of this sort of data analysis? Where are you at with that?
I'm not sure about. Actually, I think Tommy's still getting a handle on things. But for me, I feel only slightly ahead of Tommy. It is tough. You're right. I think there's a level of certainty or a level of specificity that I am expecting when I go into it, and I just don't get that. I want to. It's, it's sort of silly. I want the data to come out and say you run the best camp in the country, hands down, and I can then plaster that on my. It doesn't say that though. It actually doesn't say anything close to that. So I think what it does is it like any data, even if it were about my program, like leads or something like this, it makes me ask more questions in a certain area. So it sort of leads me to a place, and I feel like our data at camp would enable us to put together a group of kids, let's say our leadership kids or something like that, and then ask them pointed questions about their experience. So we have a sort of qualitative piece to expand upon the quantitative stuff that came out
Right.
of our data.
Right.
And so that's insightful, and that's just a sort of nuanced in a way that I don't think I understood when I started out.
Mm-hmm.
Deb, one of the things that we've struggled with just with the ACA tools the most is just the age at which the tools start to work, that they're geared towards. We start at 4 years old.
Yeah.
Our CITs are, they're our oldest campers in camp. So our pool of which to question is very small compared to our actual camp population. So that's a whole separate issue that we're trying to tackle, is how to bring that to younger in an appropriate way to ask those questions to kind of get a sense of where those growth points are or where those development points are in our program right now.
Wow, and that's just such a huge issue, Ryan. I'm glad you raised that, because that is huge. And you're right. These tools that ACA have created for the kids are basically, our metrics go pretty good from 9 or 10 and up. But
Right.
for the little tiny kids, and that's why the Not-for-Profit Council has been so good. They have supported the development of all of these tools. We've not had any ACA money. We've not had any other outside money. It's been the Not-for-Profit Council, and honestly, the for-profit group that they used to have, the AIC group, and now Wake. I couldn't get anybody excited about any of this stuff with them. And you guys probably, you got a good idea on some of the challenges there. So what we've developed are things that really helped out that Not-for-Profit Council. A lot of them do run day camps. And so those little tinies, like what you're talking about, Ryan, that was a problem, and that's why we developed, there's that tool set that's for staff observation and parent observation. That's exactly why those tools were developed. Now, it just so happens when we tested them, the staff observation, those points that we ask staff to look for and comment on a particular set of children really works across the board. The age group really didn't have any, it just didn't factor in. It didn't matter whether you were observing a 5-year-old or whether you were observing a 15-year-old. It was able to be used both. But honestly, that was created to help camps that have, particularly day camps, that have little tiny kids, have some ability to create some kind of a data point that they could use at least as a starting point. And there's, as you said, there's lots and lots to think about, especially with those little tiny kids developmentally, where they are, how do you frame these experiences, does it really make sense on some of these outcomes to even be using them with a 5-year-old. So yeah, you raise a really good point, and the age consideration on these things can't be overlooked. I mean, they're designed for a particular set of kids, and they work well for those sets.
Right.
So
I just think as people are thinking about diving into this, it's just good for them to know that that's one of the sort of limitations, if you will, at the moment, and how to implement it in their system, in their program. And I think that's where I've spoken with Tommy. Deb, I think you know Tommy, but Matt, I think you're just getting to know Tommy more over the years about this stuff and being involved in this. And it's a big undertaking, Matt, as you've jumped into the deep end of the pool very quickly. But
humbling, I would call it.
Yeah, but I think that's part of why so few people are doing it, is because they don't really understand how to take that first bite into this, because there are so many variables. They're like, well, if it's all that variables, why even do this in the first place?
Yeah. And I would hope that we could be able to parse out the data in a way that those variables at least get acknowledged as being important. So yeah, gender's important, race, ethnicity, that's important, age, that's important, whether the kid enjoyed themselves or not, I think that's important. So the more variables that we can build into these things and then give flexibility. I mean, like on this online tool, there's 10 open slots where a camp could put in their own variables that they think are important to track. So it's not a perfect system by any means, and I would never tell a camp that doing this kind of work is easy, because it's not. And I love this Raise the Bar group, because this group of camps, almost all of you are younger professionals, and you're coming at this in a whole different way than what's been brought to the table before, and you're not afraid to tackle something that looks kind of hard. So, I mean, it's my hat's off. I love this group. I think you guys are doing fabulous work, and it's not pretty, and it's messy, but I mean, I've been doing this work for many, many, many years, longer than you guys have been on the planet. And honest to goodness, it's a messy business. And, but somebody's got to do it. I mean, we need to have the information. We need to, as problematic as it might be, we need to start somewhere. And Matt, your idea of telling a story, but then also trying to get some of the more kind of qualitative things behind this. Ryan, you alluded to the very same thing. Data, that's a tool, and the more that you can help give context to those numbers, the better off you are. That's why I always love, a mixed methods approach, where you get some numbers, but now you do some questions, or you figure out some ways of getting some additional information to help you make sense of those numbers. Because numbers alone, that's all they are. The benchmarks help. Those norms help give a little bit of context. But honestly, to make it useful for your camp, I think you have to do your own context building and your own storytelling. And that's, it's not an easy enterprise, but you guys are doing it. That's the great thing. You're doing it. It's fabulous. I love it.
Well, it really feels like we're just scratching the surface, Deb. I think it's sort of funny to do these half-hour increments, especially when you're presenting, because we just barely started looking at your attachments. So I'm glad we're having the conversation, and I hope we do a lot more of them. Ryan had to jet because he had a 2 o'clock.
Yep. Well, thanks for asking me, Matt. This was really fun.
Well,
And
I hope you'll come back and do more of it, because there are sure to be other folks who have questions about YOB, and even I find in myself every time we talk about it, I feel a little bit more familiar each time.
yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yep, it does take a certain amount of getting used to. And, you know, everybody wants to have something that says, hey, you're doing the best job on the planet. You know, we all want that. And it's hard. It's hard to generate that. And what makes me happy is the fact that you all are willing to try to work from some data. I mean, we've had people in the camp world for decades, you know, say how great it was and how this is the best thing on the planet, and you know they're making all these impacts, and it's all good. We all love hearing those stories, but you know, the data behind those stories is not very rich. You know, we don't have a lot in some cases
That's
to back
good.
up what we say. So, well, thanks for having me talk with you guys today, Matt. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I've been getting emails during the talk saying I'm sorry I missed it, and I will watch it online. So wave to all of your
Yay!
many viewers. Deb, thanks very much. I really appreciate it, and
Thanks, Matt.
we'll talk again real soon.
All right, thanks a bunch.
All right, bye.
Okay, bye.